The words hung in the air, sharp and sterile, cutting through the familiar scent of old wood and lemon polish that always filled the hallway. "We're leaving tomorrow. The house is sold." Sarah stood by the front door, her jacket already on, car keys dangling from her index finger like a tiny silver pendulum marking the end of time. My time. She said it so simply, a statement of fact, as if she were announcing the weather or that she'd picked up milk from the store. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on a scuff mark on the floorboards, the very same one her father had made years ago, moving the old piano for my 30th birthday. My own breath caught in my chest, a sudden, sharp pain, as if the wind had been knocked out of me. Sold. The word itself was an obscenity in this house, a violation. This wasn't just a house. It was a living, breathing archive of our lives. It was the walls that had absorbed the echoes of my children's laughter and the silent weight of my tears after Arthur passed. It was the window in the kitchen where I'd watched for the school bus every afternoon, and the worn armchair in the living room where my husband had read stories to a small pigtailed Sarah. It was the pencil marks on the doorframe, charting her growth from a wobbly toddler to a young woman who now stood ready to erase it all. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. At 34, she was the image of her father, with his determined jaw and his eyes that could turn from warm honey to cold steel in an instant. Right now, they were steel. She had his pragmatism too, a trait I once admired but had come to see as a form of emotional detachment. For her, this was a transaction, an asset to be liquidated, a burden to be shed. For me, it was everything. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to hear it again, to give my mind a moment to catch up with the brutal efficiency of her decision. "The house is sold, Mom," she repeated, a little louder this time, a flicker of impatience in her tone. She finally met my eyes. "The closing was this afternoon. The new owners want to take possession as soon as possible. We need to be out by tomorrow evening." "We." She had said, "we." It was a word meant to soften the blow, to create a pretense of a shared journey, but it felt like a lie. This was her decision, a unilateral decree that I was only now being informed of. For the past year, since my health had taken a turn, Sarah had taken over my finances. "Just to make things easier for you, Mom," she'd said. I had agreed, exhausted from the endless doctor's appointments and the constant, draining ache in my bones. I trusted her. I had signed papers she put in front of me, her explanations a smooth, reassuring murmur about power of attorney and managing bills. I'd seen her as my protector, my advocate, the daughter who was stepping up to care for her aging mother. I had not seen her as a realtor. My hand instinctively went to the pocket of my cardigan, my fingers brushing against the crisp edge of the folded document inside. It felt warm, a small secret source of heat against the sudden chill that had enveloped me. The deed. The real one. The one I had quietly, painstakingly had an attorney draw up and file with the county clerk just last week, transferring the property from the trust Sarah managed back into my name. Solely my name. It had felt like a betrayal then, going behind her back. My lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Gable, had been gentle but firm. "Helen," he'd said, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, "this house is your primary asset, but more than that, it is your home. You have every right to secure it. Your daughter's power of attorney gives her authority, but you are still the owner of your life. You can revoke that authority at any time." The thought had been planted a month ago when I overheard her on the phone in the garden. She was talking to her husband, Mark. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "It's a money pit, Mark." "No, she's sentimental. You know how she is. It's the smart move. We could finally build our own place." A money pit. She had called my home a money pit. The foundation her grandfather had laid. The roof her husband had re-shingled himself. The garden I had poured my soul into for 40 years. It was just an obstacle on her path to a new life, a bigger life, a life away from the cloying memories of the past. Away from me. That's when the seed of fear had taken root. The fear that I wasn't just a mother to be cared for, but a problem to be managed. The house was the first step. What would be next? Now, standing in the hallway that held the ghosts of my entire life, that fear turned into a cold, hard certainty. She had gone through with it. She had sold my home from under me, believing I was just a passive, compliant old woman who would pack her bags and go wherever she was told. Perhaps to that sterile-looking, assisted living community she had left brochures for on the coffee table. I pulled my hand from my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly. I looked at the determined stranger who was my daughter, at the packed boxes I hadn't even noticed before, stacked neatly by the staircase. She had been planning this for weeks, moving in silence, dismantling my life piece by piece while I smiled and thanked her for bringing me soup. The pain in my chest sharpened, but it was no longer just grief. It was anger, a slow, burning rage that I hadn't felt in years. The quiet, accommodating Helen, the woman who avoided confrontation and always tried to keep the peace, was gone. In her place was a woman whose back was against the wall, a mother who was about to fight for the only thing she had left. She was still looking at me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for the tears, the protests, the pleading, waiting for me to crumble. But I did not crumble. I held her gaze, the steel in her eyes meeting a fire in mine she had never seen before. "No," I said, and this time my voice was not a whisper. It was clear and steady. "No, Sarah, the house is not sold." A flicker of confusion crossed Sarah's face, quickly replaced by a weary condescension. It was the look she'd been giving me for months, the one that said, "Oh, Mom, you don't understand." It was a look that dismissed me, that infantilized me, and it fueled the fire in my veins. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice taking on the placating tone one uses with a difficult child. "I know this is a shock. I should have talked it over with you more. I see that now. But it's done. The papers are signed. The buyers are a lovely young couple. They're very excited." "What papers?" I challenged, taking a step forward. My legs felt stronger than they had in years. "What papers did you sign, Sarah?" "The closing documents," she said, sighing dramatically, the car keys jingling with her impatience. "As your power of attorney, I have the authority to manage your assets. We talked about this. Selling the house is the most responsible decision. It's too much for you to maintain, and the money will ensure you have the best care possible." The best care. The glossy brochures for Golden Meadows, with its smiling, silver-haired residents playing shuffleboard and its sterile hotel-like rooms. It looked less like a home and more like a place to wait for the end. They had sold my life, not my house. They had sold my future for their own convenience. "You had authority," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "But you don't own my life, and you don't own this house." She actually scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Of course I don't own it, Mom. The trust does. And I am the trustee. Honestly, I don't have time for this. We have to start packing the essentials." She turned toward the boxes, ready to dismiss me and proceed with the dismantling of my world. "Stop." The word was so sharp, so commandingly cold that she froze, her back still to me. She turned around slowly, her eyes narrowed. The mask of the patient, caring daughter was slipping, revealing the frustrated, cornered woman beneath. "What did you just say to me?" I said, "Stop." I reached into my pocket and my fingers, no longer trembling, closed around the deed. I pulled it out. The paper was thick, official, folded into a neat, firm rectangle. I held it up between us, a white flag that was really a declaration of war. "You can't sell what doesn't belong to you. And this house," I said, letting the words land with the full weight of their meaning, "belongs to me." She stared at the document, then at my face, a slow dawning horror replacing the anger in her eyes. "What is that? What are you talking about? Mom, are you feeling all right? Did you take your medication today?" The accusation, the implication that I was delusional, that my mind was failing me, was the final straw. All the love, all the hurt, all the years of quiet compromises coalesced into a single point of unyielding strength. "I am perfectly fine," I said, my voice like ice. "But you are about to have a very, very bad day." I unfolded the paper with a series of sharp, deliberate snaps. The official letterhead of the county clerk's office was visible at the top. "This, Sarah, is a legally recorded quitclaim deed, filed last Tuesday. It revokes the transfer of the property to the trust and returns full, unassailable ownership to me, Helen Marie Albright, the sole owner." I held it out for her to take. Her hand was hesitant, as if she were afraid it might burn her. She snatched it from my grasp, and her eyes scanned the page, her face paling with every line she read. She read the legal description of the property, the parcel number she had probably memorized. She read the language of revocation. She read the signature of my lawyer, Mr. Gable, and she read my signature, clear and defiant. Finally, her eyes landed on the official stamp from the county recorder's office, the date and time of its filing a brutal, undeniable fact. This is not possible," she stammered, looking from the paper to my face, her own expression a mixture of shock and utter betrayal. "You can't do this. I'm your power of attorney. You went behind my back?" "Did you think I wouldn't?" I shot back, the anger finally spilling over. Did you think I would just let you sell my memories to the highest bidder? This house is not an asset, Sarah. It's not a money pit. This is my home. It was your father's home. It's where I brought you home from the hospital. Every crack in that ceiling, every scratch on that floor is a part of our story. A story you were so eager to sell for a down payment on a new life. That's not fair, she cried, her voice cracking. Now the tears were coming, hot and angry. I have been taking care of you for a year, driving you to appointments, managing your bills, worrying myself sick every time you coughed. Mark and I have put our lives on hold for you. This house is a weight on all of us. It's falling apart. The mortgage, the taxes, the repairs. I did this for you, so you would be safe and secure. Safe? I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You call shipping me off to a facility so you can be free of me safe? You call selling my home without even telling me secure? That wasn't for me, Sarah, that was for you. This was your escape plan. The truth of it hung between us, ugly and exposed. She looked down at the deed in her hand as if it were a snake that had bitten her. All her careful planning, all her secret arrangements, all her rationalizations had just been rendered null and void by a single piece of paper, wielded by the mother she had so fatally underestimated. The people, the buyers, she whispered, the full implication of her actions crashing down on her. I signed a contract, a sales contract. I took their deposit. Then you had better call them, I said, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. You had better call them and explain that you made a mistake, that you attempted to sell a property that you had no legal right to sell. That will be a very interesting conversation for you to have with your husband, the lawyer. I turned my back on her then, walking past the stacks of boxes, each one a monument to her betrayal. I walked into the living room and sat down in Arthur's armchair. The worn fabric felt like a comforting embrace. The silence from the hallway was absolute. There was no more talk of leaving tomorrow. There was only the deafening sound of a life that had been broken, and the uncertain quiet of what would come next. I sat in the deepening twilight, the familiar contours of Arthur's chair a small comfort in the vast, echoing silence of the house. I could hear Sarah in the kitchen, her movements sharp and jerky. A cupboard door slammed. The faucet turned on, then off, abruptly. Then I heard her hushed, frantic voice, and I knew she was on the phone with Mark. I couldn't make out the words, only the panicked, rising pitch, the desperate cadence of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. I closed my eyes, picturing my son-in-law, a man who always seemed to be appraising his surroundings, calculating value and risk. He would not be happy. This was a risk he hadn't calculated. For a moment, a wave of guilt washed over me. Had I been too harsh? Had I destroyed the last fragile bridge between my daughter and me? But then I thought of the boxes in the hall, the condescending tone, the words, money pit. This wasn't a sudden impulse. This was a plan, executed with cold precision. My guilt receded, replaced by a weary resolve. I had not started this war, but I had to finish it. The phone call ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more ominous. I heard her footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming back towards the living room. When she appeared in the doorway, her face was a stony mask. The tears were gone, the shock replaced by a cold, hard fury. This was not my panicked daughter anymore. This was Mark's wife. Mark is looking into it, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. He's going to see what he can do to mitigate the damage. The damage you caused, I corrected softly, refusing to let her shift the blame. The damage we now have to deal with, she snapped. I have to call the buyers, Mom. I have to tell them that the sale is off, that the contract is void. Do you have any idea the legal position you've put me in? They can sue. They can sue me for breach of contract, for misrepresentation. Mark thinks they have a strong case. They have a case against you, Sarah. Not me, I stated, my gaze unwavering. You tried to sell something that wasn't yours. That's fraud. The word hit her like a physical blow. She flinched. I did it for you. When are you going to understand that? I saw you struggling, getting weaker. I was trying to secure your future. My future is not for you to decide, I said, my voice rising slightly. My future is right here, in this house, where I choose to be. Was it so hard to imagine that I might want to live out my days in the home I built with my husband, surrounded by my memories? Or was the allure of a new condo too strong to resist? She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. The accusation hit its mark because it was the truth. We both knew it. Her grand sacrifice was tainted by self-interest, and the ugliest truths are always the ones we deny most vehemently. Fine, she said, her voice trembling with a rage that was almost theatrical. Fine. You want the house? You've got it. But you're on your own. When the boiler breaks down this winter, don't call me. When the roof starts leaking again, figure it out yourself. The appointments, the prescriptions, the groceries, that's all on you now. I'm done. I am done trying to help you when you're just going to throw it back in my face. It was an ultimatum, delivered with the brutal efficiency of a surgeon's knife. She was cutting me off, not just from her help, but from her life. She was trying to frighten me, to make me see the lonely, difficult path I was choosing, hoping I would back down and beg for her to stay, to take over again. She saw an old, frail woman incapable of managing her own life. I looked around the room, at the fading light catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I saw the photograph of Arthur on the mantelpiece, his kind, smiling eyes. I felt the deep, unshakable roots that connected me to this place, to this life. It would be hard. It would be lonely. But it would be mine. I met her cold stare, and for the first time, I felt not anger, but a profound pity for her. She was so busy planning for the future that she had forgotten how to live in the present, so focused on accumulating things that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. I'll manage, I said quietly, but with a finality that left no room for argument. I managed before you took over, and I will manage again. Her face crumbled, the anger finally giving way to a raw, wounded disbelief. She had played her last card, and it had failed. She had expected me to fold, to surrender to fear. She had not expected the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who had nothing left to lose and therefore everything to fight for. Without another word, she turned and walked away. And this time, I knew she wasn't just walking out of the room. She was walking out of my life. The front door clicked shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I half expected to hear the roar of her car engine, but there was only silence. I walked to the window and peered through the curtains. Her car was still in the driveway. She was sitting inside, the faint glow of her phone illuminating her face. A call to Mark, no doubt, a strategy session. After a few long minutes, the car finally pulled away, its taillights disappearing down the street, leaving me in the profound and unsettling quiet of my reclaimed kingdom. The next morning, I woke to a house that felt both liberated and achingly empty. The stack of boxes in the hallway greeted me like a monument to the battle I had won, but the victory felt hollow. Sarah's threat echoed in my mind. You're on your own. For the first time in a year, I was. My routine, once managed by my daughter, was now a series of small, deliberate choices. I made my own coffee, the gurgle of the old machine a comforting, familiar sound. I sorted my morning pills into the plastic weekly dispenser, my fingers fumbling slightly. Sarah had always done it with such swift efficiency. When I opened the refrigerator, I saw the neat labeled containers of food she had prepared. Chicken soup, mon, salad, tews. A pang of something sharp and complicated, not quite regret, but a deep, sorrowful ache went through me. I closed the door and made myself a simple piece of toast. The first real test came 3 days later. A steady, percussive drip, drip, drip echoed from the kitchen. The faucet on the sink, the one Arthur had replaced a decade ago, had finally given out. A year ago, this would have been a minor annoyance. I would have called Sarah, and by afternoon, a plumber would have been at the door, the problem solved, the bill sent to her. Now the dripping sounded like a taunt. See? It seemed to say. You can't do this. I stood before the sink, my heart sinking with each drop. I could feel the tendrils of panic, the insidious whisper that I had made a terrible mistake. I was old. I was tired. And the house was, as Sarah had said, falling apart. My hand reached for the phone. My thumb hovered over her name in my contacts list. Sarah, just one call. One admission of defeat. She would be here. She would take control, and the dripping would stop. But I knew what the price of that call would be. My surrender. The deed in my drawer would become a meaningless piece of paper. I pulled my hand back. No, I whispered to the empty room. I'll manage. I remembered Arthur's old metal toolbox in the basement. It took me a full 10 minutes to get it up the stairs, my back screaming in protest. I opened it. The smell of oil and rust a ghostly greeting from my husband. Inside was a chaotic jumble of wrenches and pliers. I found a wrench that looked about the right size, and, with the help of a video I found on the internet using my old, slow tablet, I managed to get under the sink. It was awkward and painful. I scraped my knuckles. At one point, a spray of cold water hit me in the face, and I almost gave up, sitting on the cold linoleum, drenched and defeated. But then I looked at my hands, reddened and sore, and I saw not weakness, but effort. I saw myself trying. It took me nearly 2 hours, but finally, I tightened the last packing nut, and the dripping stopped. I pulled myself up, my whole body aching, and looked at the silent faucet. I had done it. I had slain the dragon. It was a small, silly thing, a leaky faucet, but it felt like the most significant victory of my life. I started to laugh, a real, genuine laugh that turned into a quiet, cleansing sob. The days that followed found a new rhythm. I called the pharmacy myself to refill a prescription. I found Arthur's old address book and called the son of his old gardening buddy to ask about the roof. He came by the next day, inspected the shingles, and told me it would hold for another year or two. He didn't try to sell me a new roof. He just gave me an honest answer. I began to unpack Sarah's boxes, putting away the life she had tried to pack up for me. I put my own books back on the shelves, my own photos back on the tables. The house started to feel like mine again, not just in title, but in spirit. A week passed with no word from Sarah. Then another. I knew she was waiting for my call, for my surrender. But with each day that passed in my quiet, dripping, faucet-free house, I felt less like a victim and more like a survivor. I was rediscovering a strength I thought I had lost, a resilience buried under a year of passive acceptance. The loneliness was still there, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my days, but it was no longer frightening. It was just a part of my life now, a life that was, finally and completely, my own. A month passed, then another. Autumn began to paint the leaves outside my window in hues of gold and crimson. The quiet in the house became less of a silence and more of a peace. I had established a new life built on old foundations. My gardener's son came by once a week, not just to check on the house, but to share a cup of tea and stories of his own family. The woman from the local senior center helped me set up a grocery delivery service. I was not just surviving, I was building a community, one small connection at a time. I was slower, more deliberate, but I was in control. The ache of Sarah's absence was a constant companion, a dull throb in my heart, but I learned to live with it. One crisp afternoon, as I was pruning the last of the roses in my garden, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Sarah's. I watched, my shears frozen in midair as she got out. She looked thinner, her face etched with a weariness that hadn't been there before. She didn't march to the door with her old, brisk efficiency, but approached me slowly, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her coat. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes scanning the garden, the neatly trimmed hedges, the pot of bright chrysanthemums by the door. "The place looks good," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm managing," I replied, the words neutral, without triumph or accusation. She nodded, her gaze falling to the ground. "The buyer sued," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for the deposit and damages. Mark settled it. It cost us a lot of money." I didn't say, "I told you so." I just waited. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. "I was so angry," she finally continued, looking up at me, her eyes glistening. "At you. For being so stubborn. For making everything so difficult. But mostly I was angry at myself." A tear traced a path down her cheek. "I kept telling myself it was for you. But it wasn't, was it? Not really. I was scared, Mom. I saw you getting frail, and it terrified me. I thought if I could just control everything, the house, the money, the doctors, I could stop it. I could stop you from ever leaving me." The confession, raw and painful, shattered the last of my anger. I saw her then, not as the ruthless pragmatist, but as the little girl who used to cry whenever I left the room. Her methods had been cruel, her actions a profound betrayal, but the fear at their root was a twisted kind of love. "Oh, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I took a step forward, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I reached out and took her hand. It was cold. You can't control everything. Sometimes you just have to hold on and live through it. Together. She squeezed my hand, her sob a choked, desperate sound. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." We stood there for a long time, in the fading autumn light, a mother and daughter finding their way back to each other, across a chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. The house stood behind us, a silent, steadfast witness. It was not a prize to be won or a burden to be shed. It was a home. And a home, I now knew, is not made of wood and stone, but of the difficult, imperfect, and unbreakable bonds of family. We had a lot to repair, not just the cracks in the walls, but the cracks in our hearts. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt the quiet, certain hope that we would. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a message of hope. Sometimes the deepest love is found not in trying to control life, but in having the courage to live it, side by side.